Well, good evening. I am Tamara L., and welcome to another installation of Just Another Messenger, where we raise the situational urgency and consciousness regarding today's current events. And we have a lot of current events to discuss today. Now, each episode of Just Another Messenger will dive deep into the historical past by examining the philosophies, legal system, and political decisions that continues to influence our lives today. Now, over the past several weeks, we've been going over information on our episode called Black and Curse. Now, this is part 3 of Black and Curse, which is the wrap up. Now, we're going to continue uncovering the hidden systems that have worked for centuries to suppress Black communities. If you've been following this series, you've already know that the racial classification of Black is more than just an identity. It is a system of control. And that's what we're discussing here. And we're going to talk about the legal, economic, as well as political constraints that today we dive into like the 4 pillars of the systematic entrapment, such as housing, banking, education, and religion. Now we're going to deal with redlining, predatory lending to miseducation, as well as religious oppression. Now, this episode, we're going to break down how these institutions have been used to maintain an economic, spiritual, and intellectual confinement. Now, you don't want to forget to miss our episodes. So go ahead over in YouTube if you haven't done so already. Subscribe, share, and like. And hit that like button so you can be a part of the conversation that matters. And you do not want to miss this episode today. All right, we have a lot to discuss today in this episode. And before we get started, let's go ahead and put our disclaimer up to say the views, opinions, and thoughts are the protective expression of Tamara L. for storytelling and educational purposes and does not provide statutory counseling for any United States color of law jurisdictional proceeding. And we're going to go ahead and put our banner up to give our housekeeping rules here so you'll be able to see how to communicate with us on a given basis. Now, as I say, continue to like, share, and subscribe over on YouTube at Just Another Messenger. And you can follow us on X at JAM underscore 404 podcast. And for our loyal supporters who like to thank you each and every time. And if you'd like to continue to support us, please support us via Cash App at Just Another $, at Just Another Messenger. And also, if you know someone or you would like to be a part of the show that matters, because we're about more than just talk here, you can send us a friendly email to Just Another Messenger podcast at gmail.com. All right, so we have that information right there. That is our disclaimer. What's going on around the world? Now, we know over the past couple of weeks, there's been issues with immigration, ceasefires with the 2 different wars that was going on in the campaign during the Biden-Harris administration campaign, with the Israel and Palestine war, as well as the war in Ukraine and Russia, the ceasefire with Israel and Hamas ended on the day of inauguration of number 47 President Donald Trump, and they're in negotiation regarding ceasefire after recently being in Saudi Arabia. And the president, Zelensky, said at this point, the ceasefire is in the hands of Putin, Russia. So it's up to Russia now to decide if there want to be a ceasefire. Now, also during this campaign, President Trump, he gave a lot of promises regarding what he will and would not do and things of that nature, and it's playing out, during his run for the presidency, and that is playing out as we speak, because this is one of the things he talked about that he would do during that campaign. Let's look at this.
And here's what I will do to defeat anti-Semitism and defend our Jewish citizens in America. My first week back in the Oval Office, my administration will inform every college president that if you do not end anti-Semitic propaganda, they will lose their accreditation and federal tax support. Truth is, you don't have to do much after that. Will you do that? It's going to work miracles. Please sit down. We will not subsidize the creation of terrorist sympathizers, and we're not going to do it certainly on American soil. We're not going to do it anywhere. Next, I will inform every educational institution in our land that if they permit violence, harassment, or threats against Jewish students, the schools will be held accountable for violations of the civil rights law.
Let's analyze that in a little bit more details. He said, and for violation of the civil rights law. Now, just recently, there was an arrest that took place here on March the 9th, in which he was a former college student. And his name, let's just go over this. Let's just go over this in details because this is quite triggering because this deals with a lot of things from the 14th Amendment. It deals with immigration. It deals with naturalization. It deals with a lot of things that we must take a look at here. Now, on March the 9th, Mutmed Khalil, he is a 29-year-old Palestinian activist and a recent graduate of Columbia University School of International Public Affairs. He was born in, he's a Syrian refugee camp, and he holds an Algerian citizenship and has been a legal permanent resident of the United States. Let me make that clear. He is a legal permanent resident of the United States, which means that he holds a green card, such as President Donald Trump's wife, Ivanka, holds a green card. So, which means they got certain privileges that comes with being a green card holder, such as 14th Amendment. They have certain privileges as protection under the 14th Amendment. Now, on March the 9th, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement arrested Khalil at his university-owned apartment in Manhattan. Now, the Department of Homeland Security started the arrest and was conducted in support of President Trump executive orders prohibiting anti-Semite, let's just say that, alleging that Khalil led activists aligned to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. Now, there's been a lot going on regarding that. We have to look at this in a little bit more details because when we're thinking about that, green card holders, they have protections such as the First Amendment, the Fifth and the 14th Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Eighth Amendment. Go look those up. We're not going to go into details about that because we have a lot to go over because it ties into identity, racial identity. So as we're looking at immigration status, you're looking at also refugee status. You're looking at all these statuses that that are being questioned right now in the media. It plays a lot into, we have to understand what is really going on behind the curtain, because we're not to take this as just this day. We can't take this as face value, because taking this as face value, it also hurt the American national. It hurts the American citizen, as well as hurts the immigration. So this is a lot to unravel and unpack. And it saddens me that there's not support when it comes down to just understanding what is going on in this nation, in this body of nation, what is going on in this public nation that under the jurisdictional control called the United States of America. We have to look at this information in full detail and not take this lightly, what's going on here. So as we get started with the information, we're going to tie all this information in with what's going on with Khalil regarding free speech, because this is not just attack on immigration. This is attack on also free speech and protection of that as well. So a lot of these protections that are codified within the Constitution, that's is a protection of for the people of the society. It's being questioned because now it also violates a lot of the treaty laws as well. So it violates the supremacy. So we must be real vigilant and civic on this. Like I said, Just Another Messenger deals with the situational urgency and consciousness what's going on in around the world today. So that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to look at this. Let's go ahead and continue on forward with this, what's going on around the world. And our recap. Let's go over our recap here from part 2 of Black and Cursed. And part 2, we talk about the political history. We talked about the Black liberation movement. We talked about Black codes, the legal side of it, and Black policing when it comes down to the wrap up smear campaign. We touched on this information there. So go, if you like to want to kind of bridge the information together, go back to our page on YouTube at Just Another Messenger and go through that episode so you'll be able to kind of pull it all the information together. Now, as we move forward with Black and Cursed, regarding part 3, regarding the wrap up smear campaigns, we're going to touch on the last 4 elements of this. We're going to touch on housing, banking, education, and religion. And we're going to talk about how this racial identity of Black and Cursed affects the area of housing, banking, education, and religion, and how this has been going on from the 1700s up till today. So we're definitely going to get into how this information really affects us. Okay. Now we're going to start off with this. We're going to reiterate this wrap up smear campaign. We're going to make sure we understood this in detail. And when you look at the wrap up smear campaign, you have to look at the objective, the content, and the various platforms such as mainstream media, social media outlets. You have to look at that being all funneled into creating a false narrative. And once that false narrative is created, it goes into what you call media amplification, such as merchandising, selling it, which means that all these different outlets that's chirping and talking about this, they're getting paid. They're getting compensated for this false narrative that's now is taking its wings and is moving forward. It's creating the life of its own, So, and then it goes into a form of weaponization. So, which means the creators of the smear then cite the media coverage as proof that the false claims must be true, using it to discredit, attack, and politically weaken the target. Keep in mind, this is a strategy. This is a strategy to stop various movements, such as Black liberation movement, nationality movement, free speech movement. So you have to put all this information in its content. And then once the public perception, once the lie is embedded into public discourse, it becomes true in the eyes of the beholder, because they see it on all these various outlets. And no matter what the facts say, the lie become a truth, because now you're operating in the lie becomes, let me see how I can say this. The lie is the truth is treason in an empire full of lies. That is the best way I can sum that up. The truth is treasonous in an empire full of lies. And let's look how Nancy addresses this as well.
The wrap-up smear. You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and they'll say, see, it's reported in the press that this, and this. So they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic, and it's self-evident. But I think I'm worth the trouble, quite frankly.
She said it's self-evident. This wrap-up smear campaign is self-evident. So this has been going on for a long time. And let's look at this. Let's look how the wrap-up smear campaign has taken shape regarding housing. Let's look at that. Let's look at redlining. Let's look at the 5 housing smear campaign that has taken place from from the 1930s all the way down. And I just pulled out 5 of them. It's a lot of them. I just pulled out the top 5. 5 housing smear campaign that has taken place. You have redlining and a financial risk smear. That was from the 1930s to the 1960s. Then you have the urban renewal and the blight smear from the 1940s to the 1970s. They overlapped each other. Then you had what you call the welfare queen smear and public housing segregation campaign. That was from the 1970s and the 1990s. Then you had the subprime mortgage crisis and the irresponsible borrower smear from the 1990s to the 2008. And this was during the collapse of that was the collapse of the 2008, that the housing market is still paying for that as of today. So every house that's being purchased, people say, oh, you can't get a 1%. If you look at in codified in law, until 2030, the government in every loan, purchase or refi, any type of housing loan, there's a 1% built-in already built into that goes back to the government because of the housing crisis of 2008. Then you had the gentrification and the neighborhood revitalization smear. This is going on today. It's from the 2000 up to present. This is going on today. Now, what does that redlining look like here?
What is redlining? Redlining is a discriminatory lending practice denying access to federally backed mortgages and loans to certain communities based on race and ethnicity. It all started in the 1930s. During the housing crisis of the Great Depression, real estate moguls such as Springfield's Harry Kissel laid the groundwork for the National Housing Act of 1934. From this, a new federal agency was formed, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and with it, residential security maps that became the standard to determine the best places for housing investments. White communities with strong racially restricted deeds were given a grade A rating and identified as desirable for lending purposes, while Black communities, regardless of their economic status, were given a grade D rating and branded as hazardous and high risk. No federally backed loans would be made there. Redlining locked out millions of Americans from accessing mortgages and stunted opportunities for Black families to build wealth to pass down to future generations. Although the practice of redlining was outlawed with the signing of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, the damage was done. Segregation was embedded in our cities and suburbs. Living in segregated communities has modern-day consequences, including sharp disparities in family wealth, education, and life expectancy. These maps were made more than 80 years ago, and yet they still tell a story that impacts us today, the story of redlining.
As it say, redlining continued to impact us today. Let's look what the smear campaign talk about, where the federal government and the banks falsely label Black neighborhoods as financially risky under the Homeowners Loan Corporation guidelines. And the media amplified it by they created maps marking Black areas in red, hazardous to discourage investment. And once the reports claimed Black neighborhoods would cause property value decline and neighborhood instability, it created a weaponization into the housing law. And this is how they codified this. This created, back from the 1930s all the way to now, 2025, this redlining created instability and to be able to have economic advancement. It made it impossible for Black families to get home loans still to this day. Not only that, the Federal Housing Administration refused to insure mortgages in Black areas, but subsidized white-only suburbs. That still happens today. So please don't get it twisted that, oh, I have a home, I brought a house. The discriminatory practice still goes on till today. Black families were forced into high interest rate predatory lending. Predatory lending still take place in 2025. So this is not something that only happened in 1930s and 1960s, 1970. It still is taking place in 2025. Want to make this very clear. Now let's go from the redlining into how the gentrification. They say, oh, your neighborhood bad. You're not going to have the money. You're not going to have the money to be able to, in the economic floor, to be able to bring in investors to bring an economy into the neighborhood. So as the values continue to weaken and go down, they say, oh, we're going to call this tactic rebranding. So this is like a rebranding displacement as progress. So this is now gentrification is codified, is renamed as a rebranding. And what does this smear campaign does? Real estate developers and city officials paint Black neighborhoods as dangerous and in need of revitalization. Are they dangerous? Yes, they're dangerous because there's not the proper resources that are placed in these neighborhoods. And we're not talking about policing. We're just talking about being able to have resources, have an economic floor for commerce, to be able to have commerce, to be able to compete. That's what's not placed in the communities. Now, the media amplification, where the news stories highlight new businesses and uprising property values while ignoring displaced Black residents. So it's like you're being, with the rise in the new investments coming in, it creates a disparity to be able to meet the cost, because it's like a big gap in cost now, where you once were able to afford living in this area is now out of reach based off your economic ability to pay. This creates a displacement for homeowners, and the Black homeowners are blamed for not keeping up with the Joneses, with the rise in costs. And this weaponization in housing law, everything, the tactics become a weaponization codified in law, where the property taxes and the rent prices increase, forcing Black families out, and the developers buy at a low. They buy low now. The developers buy back on homes at low prices, then flip them for a major large profit. Now, the police presence is now there. They say, oh, we got now that it's shiny and beautiful, we're going to bring the police presence in to protect the shiny and beautiful, now rebrand area. And they increase the policing protection for the property value now. And now it's not just Black people are able to be there. Now you have a different demographics, where you have the YT residents now living in the new gentrified rebranding area. So of course they're going to get the protection, and this lead to more racial profiling. It's like, what are you doing here? What are you doing in this neighborhood? You're not supposed to be in this neighborhood anymore. We rebranded this. You're supposed to be moved out. So it creates that systemic racism that occurred through the housing rebranding displacement, aka regentrification process. And this is the real impact of the housing smear campaign. Black ownership rates plummeted, created a massive racial wealth gap. Generational wealth has stripped from Black families. White suburbs flourished while Black communities were denied economic growth. Black communities are systemically pushed out of their own neighborhoods, and wealthy buyers reap the benefits of regentrification while Black families struggle with housing instability. Then the Black culture is codified, but Black residents are excluded from economic growth. Now, most recently, I saw something that just broke my heart online, where there's a former, she's a former R&B singer in Vogue, in the music industry, that stated for the past 3 years she's been sleeping in her car. Now, how do you go from one of the most well-known R&B groups to now you're sleeping in your car? We have a crisis. We have a housing crisis. We have a mental crisis. We have an economic crisis. in this country. There is a urgency that's going on here for people to wake up and recognize what is taking place and what is taking shape. Because is this the land of the free? This the land home of the brave? No one should be homeless in United States of America. Not one person. And we're going to continue here. Let's look at the 5 banking smear campaigns that has took place over time. I think this is quite interesting to take a look at here. This campaign, let's look at this. This started from the 1800s, and it's further than that. But I pulled out the top 5 here. The 5 banking smear campaigns that took place. The first one is called the Freedman's Bank Collapse of 1865 to 1874. And this was the first financial smear, the first Black financial smear that took place. After you're being told to pull yourself up from your own bootstrap, it was done, but a smear took place, and I'm going to show you. Redlining as well in the high-risk borrower smear. That was also with the housing of 1930 to 1960. It introduced into the banking arena as well. Then you had the credit score system and discriminatory lending smear from the 1970s to present. This is going on today. Today, the algorithm codified for Blacks calculates different for white creditors and consumers. And this is something where if you look in law, because we have to stop dismissing what is going on around us. When President Trump is attempting to remove the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as the agency arm to have a checks and balance against the third-party bureaus that are responsible for the algorithms. This will continue to allow discriminatory practice within the algorithm, creating a further economic wealth divide between the Black communities and any other racial identity that is codified in the U.S. system. The subprime mortgage crisis and the irresponsible borrower smear that took place from 1990 to 2008 during the crash. And then you also had a modern day banking discrimination from 2010 to present. So as you can see, you have a lot of these financial smear campaigns as well as housing smear campaign that continue to affect the Black communities today. Let's look at that.
Creation of the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, or the Freedmen's Bank as it became known, was a bold, even radical idea for its time. With the end of the Civil War in sight, a group of white Northern abolitionists, philanthropists, and business leaders met in New York in January 1865 to explore the formation of a permanent bank to help African American Civil War soldiers and the African American community. Having wages for the first time in their lives, newly emancipated men and women needed a safe place to deposit their earnings. On February 13, 1865, a bill to incorporate the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company was brought before Congress. Just 3 weeks later, President Abraham Lincoln signed the bill into law. The bank was crucial to help create opportunity for African Americans to build assets. It created a sense of protection for their money and welcomed them into the financial mainstream. Freedmen's Bank was a symbol of a stronger economic future for emancipated men and women at a key turning point in American history. 37 branch offices in 17 states and the District of Columbia were opened. In 1870, the bank's headquarters moved from New York to Washington, D.C. to the southeast corner of Lafayette Square, across the street from the White House and the Treasury Building. Most bank depositors were primarily low-wage earners, laborers, cooks, janitors, nurses, porters, seamstresses, and soldiers. But African American churches, businesses, schools, and other organizations also put their money in the bank. In addition, depositors included individuals who had been freed long before emancipation, such as physicians from Freedmen's Hospital, now Howard University Hospital, professors at Howard University, attorneys, and notables like Frederick Douglass, Captain O.S.B. Wall, and many others. It is estimated that over the 9-year life of the bank, approximately 100,000 individuals and institutions opened accounts with bank deposits totaling more than $57 million. That is equivalent to $115 billion today, based on its relative share of gross domestic product. During its first 5 years, Freedmen's Bank operated as a well-functioning institution. However, an amendment to the bank's charter led to risky asset investments. This, along with the lack of proper oversight, led to fraud, mismanagement, and abuse. In 1873, the United States experienced the financial panic, and Freedmen's Bank was not exempt from its impacts. Lack of confidence by the depositors led to runs on a bank that was already weakened. In 1874, Frederick Douglass was recruited to serve as the bank's president. He believed that the failing bank could be saved, and even invested his own money to revive it. But these efforts came too late. Freedmen's Bank closed its doors on the 29th of June, 1874. When it failed, depositors lost their savings. About half eventually received some of their money back. Others received nothing. It was a bitter conclusion to such a promising venture. The Freedmen's Bank building was sold and demolished in 1899, and in 1919, a new building that became the Treasury Annex was erected on the site. Despite its unfortunate end, the Freedmen's Bank embodied the hopes for equality and inclusion in America's economic mainstream. Its legacy must be our continued quest for inclusive prosperity for every American.
All right. We hear a lot. We in the African American community, we have heard this saying that we must pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. As you can see, through many campaigns of oppression, many campaigns of subjugation, we have made strides in pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, only for our boots to be taken from us, our economic floor to be taken, our communities to have been demolished by uprising and riots. So these things have taken place. So as we're looking at these smear campaigns, we must have to look at them as a critical eye to see that this is a systematic and a deliberate attack on the people that has been racially identified as Black, Negro, Colored, and African American. And we must have to ask yourself, how are we to get ahead of this and stay ahead of this? Because as you heard, we must create an inclusion for economic growth. It didn't say inclusion into a society that you have been having to fight to attempting to be in, that does not want you in the society. We have to look at this. We have to reevaluate the fight. Let's keep going here. Let's go. We're going to go over the smear of the Freedmen's Bank collapse of 1865 to 1874. Like we said, it was the first financial smear. The weaponization, we're just going to go over that. The weaponization of that, where the U.S. government failed to provide compensation, leading to massive losses for Black Americans. The collapse destroyed trust in the banking system, making Black communities hesitant to engage with financial institutions. This continues to go on today. This continue to go on today. And then you have campaigns where you say, they will say, oh, we have a Black bank coming up. No, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a Black bank. Because when you have the controlling when you have the controlling foundation of that bank still being under control of the United States jurisdiction, that's not a black bank. That's just a face. It's just the face of a black bank. So there's no such thing as a black bank. That's why I said we have to reevaluate our inclusiveness, the fight to stay included. We have to evaluate that, because we continue to fight to be in a building that is on fire, and we are scorched earth at this moment. Let's look at the modern day banking discrimination that's going on today. They say it started from 2010 to the present, as we all may know. We'll say modern day, but let's look at this. This is a tactic that's where they're using algorithms and AI to continue banking discrimination, where the banks claim that modern technology and AI prevent discrimination, yet black borrowers still face higher loan rejection rate. I will say this. I'm going to tell you this. I know a lot of people, there's a program out there, and it's called NACA. It's called a NACA program, right? And I'm like the spook that sat in the corner. I like to go visit a lot of these different forums just to sit there and listen. I'm not, and I go for signing up to have the appearance that I'm interested in what they're selling, but I'm not. However, I went to this program, this NACA program, in I think it's NAACP, something like that. I went to this NACA program, right? And in this NACA program, they're talking about the ability to be able to, they take you through these steps to be able to purchase the home, and help in there. The program will help with your down payment, which means they will pay your down payment. But in the small print, and I think people fail to realize and see things in small print, where it talks about a $25,000 lien that NACA places onto the property, and the lien, it is like a release, 5,000 increments per year. So every 5,000, every year, the lien reduces by 5,000. So which means that the person, if you go through this program, the person must stay in the home for a minimum of 5 years before you can buy, sell, rent, or do anything else, or you're going to be subject to the return of that lien. That lien becomes first priority in any sale or refinance. Even refinance, it becomes subject to repayment back after saying that we're paying your down payment. But a $25,000 lien is placed on every property that's going through this program. That's not the caveat of this program. The caveat of this program that I found quite interesting is that the underwriter, this is what really blew me. The underwriter of the program is Wells Fargo. And I found that to be quite misleading, because how is it that Wells Fargo is the number one underwriter of a housing program, and Wells Fargo was sued for predatory lending practice and had to pay a fine, but yet they're being placed as the number one lending and underwriter for a housing program? When does it stop? When does it stop? How could a predatory lender that was fined for discriminatory practices, look it up. They was fined for not only predatory lending, but discriminatory practice against Black communities and Black families. But yet they have been named the underwriting arm of this program. Some of this gangsters and banksters, they locking arms. You could never get ahead when you got a gun in the front and the back. You can never get ahead in this economic game, not being played under a racial identity. And we're going to go into that because the next after Black and curse, we're going to go into we're going to go into liberated by Black, from Black. We're going to go into that. And we're going to go into what liberated from Black mean, because, and we're not talking about a skin tone. As we can see, my skin tone is not Black. My skin tone hue is brown. So the last episode that's going to bring all the understanding of Black and curse to the forefront, we're going to go into liberated from Black. So, we have to understand the racial construct that continue to delude to our slavery and servitude. Thank you, Dorothea. Yes, we have to make this plain and clear. We have to make this very plain and clear. This is not about comedy. There's no time to be laughing about that's what's going on around the world. There's no time to be having alcohol and drinks and wine and satire comedy, anything of that nature. We are at code red, code alert, and we must pay attention. We must pay attention to what's going on, and we must be vigilant about getting into the civic fight for course correction. Let's look at this. Now look at the real impact of that. 3 million, which would have quantified and calculated to 70 million today in Black wealth, was erased overnight during the demolishing of the Freedmen's Bank. Black communities were set back economically for generations till to this day. It has been an economic upside down pour. The narrative of Black financial incompetence began to take hold in mainstream discourse, which means that Blacks are deemed to be illiterate in the financial arena. Black business owners struggle to scale due to funding discrimination. Scaling is it's the tipping point of all businesses, and majority of Black businesses, the Black business that are categorized as Black businesses, they fail within the first 3 years due to the inability to scale up due to lack of funding. The myth of financial irresponsibility continues to block economic opportunities, as well as wealth accumulations remain disproportionately skewed in favor of white communities. That is the real impact of the banking Black smear campaign that continues to affect us today. Let's look at the 5 educational smear campaigns. The illiterate slave, smear and anti-literacy laws of 1700s to 1865. That's 165 years, people. The Jim Crow segregation and the separate but equal smear. The violent and disruptive student smear and school to prison pipeline from the 1960s to the present. The affirmative. So as you're looking at President Trump talking about the defunding of the education system, the general education system, and putting it back to the state. He's taking the federal funding and taking that federal funding and making the state responsibility. I can understand that, because actually education starts at home. The responsibility of education should not be upon the school. That should be upon the parent. The school should just be a check and balance of what's being taught at home, but that's not what was happening. So it has created a school to prison pipeline with an increase in people being codified in the penal system for civil penalties, because majority of the people, because they agree to the crime. So a lot of them is not adjudication by information during the investigation. A lot of adjudication is based off a plea in which the person agreed to on the threat, duress, and coercion. They agree to take their body being taken bondage for a violation of a civil penalty, which is a debtor's law. Whereas the elements of a crime is murder or attempted murder. So if you take away the people that are not in the penal system for murder or attempted murder, the rest are in there for just violations of statutory crimes. This must be understood. Jasmine Crockett said it. She blew the whistle of it. I should have put it out up here as well so you can see. She gave the information regarding the elements of a crime and the elements of civil penalties. Let's look at the affirmative action equal unqualified smear. This is in regards to the DEI, which is they would like to say that the affirmative action equal unqualified. They were talking about the Black population, but actually the DEI to revoke the DEI Act, it actually is hurting the people that are classified as white, because that is the did not earn it crew. So that affirmative action, which is unqualified smear from the 1970s to the present, with the rebranded DEI, that's a backfire, because we earn it. The population that is classified as white is the didn't earn it crew from there. So that one has backfired on them. And then you have the modern education funding disparities in the failing school smear of 2005 to the present. Now let's look at this. Now the illiterate smear campaign. This is a tactic used at criminalizing Black education by claiming Black people were incapable of learning. The smear creation enslaved Black people were falsely portrayed as being intellectually inferior and unable to comprehend complex ideas. This was a smear that started in the 1700s, 1960s, 1865, that still goes on to today. Now, the media and the political application, they attributed this to the Southern lawmakers justified banning Black literacy by claiming it would cause rebellion, and religious and scientific journals argued that Black people were naturally unfit for education. This created a weaponization in law. Keep in mind that all these smear campaigns has created a codified law, which created the anti-literacy laws, made it illegal to teach enslaved people to read and write, while white teachers who educated Black students faced fines, imprisonment, or violence. Now, after slavery ended, Black schools were systematically underfunded, to have access to knowledge. They were system. So let's think about this in the full context of that. Now, a lot of people say, oh, we have HBCU schools. Now, I am definitely going to bring on someone who's going to break down the HBCU schools, because those historically Black college and universities, they are not historically Black college and universities, and we're gonna get into the unraveling of that. I'm gonna bring back the Minister of Information, and we're gonna go deep into the understanding of that, because the attempt would be saying, oh, we created this pocket for you, but that creation of pockets known today as historical Black college was not created. And still the creation of it has a lot of limitations as far as access to information, funding, which a lot of them suffers academically in those schools to be able to even compete in the market. Let's look at this Black and white literacy rate in the United States from the 1700s to the present. Now, I want us to focus on the word literacy. And what does literacy mean? As you can see, the dotted line at the bottom shows that in the United States, they're saying that all the Black people in the United States from the 1700s were illiterate, couldn't read or write. Let's put a pin in what do they mean about can't read nor write, when we are the people that are racially codified as Black, Negro, colored, African Americans. as being a descendants, the ancestors are the creators of the language. So the long-standing misnomer that the people identified as Black can't read has been a codified law, which, as you can see, in the 1700s, they said about 50% of their people was literate. And we were all illiterate in the 1700s. They're saying our literacy did not improve until after the 1950s, where we were almost equal. We was equal in literacy to the racial identity of whites around around 1950. We were equal in the literacy rate. Let's look at the meaning of literacy, what they define as literate in the United States. Now, in the 1700s, the primary language spoken in what would become the United States was English, modern English, which means the language of communicating for the colonizers, the British colonizers that came to that came to America. They spoke modern English, which means that literacy was often defined as the ability to read and sign one's name. So if English was the dominant language, especially in the 13 British colonies, there were other language of the indigenous language that were being spoken on the territory that was not English. Now, these languages that were spoken was Algonquin, Iroquoian, Sacoan, Muskogean, Utah Aztecan language, and the African languages, because you had people that were transported. You had Africans that was transported from the continent of Africa, from South Africa, and from various different countries and ports, and were brought over, not also, which means there were indigenous Americans with swarthy hue that were already in America, and then the transporting of Africans to the Americans, they spoke a different language. They spoke their language. As you can see, Wolof, Yoruba, Igbo, Mandinka. Now we're going to bring that up. Hansu and Kakonga. They had their language. So, of course, if even today, if I was to go to South America, when I travel there, a lot of times when I go to the area of Tulum, when I go to the area of Cancun and all the different areas, they speak Spanish. I'm not fluent in Spanish. Would that make me illiterate? So this is what they mean about being illiterate and can't read and write. This is that statement must be quantified, because we were reading and writing in our natural tongue. And let's see how they codified this in the movies.
James, your name is Toby. I want to hear you say it. Your name is Toby. You're going to learn to say your name. Let me hear you say it. What's your name?
Kunta Kinte.
He had his language. He had his tongue. This English, this British colonizer saying, "Oh, we're telling you your name is Toby." And he said, "No, my name is Kunta Kinte," but he's getting beat. See the variation. So that's the variation of language that must be quantified now, understood. So as we get into the modern education system, we're seeing how there's been the difference in understanding now. Now, the modern education funding disparities and failing school smear, this goes hand in hand with the illiterate slave. Now, this now is blaming Black students and teachers for underfunded schools. And the smear creation is Black majority schools were labeled as failing and blamed for poor student performance rather than addressing systemic underfunding. And the media amplified this, where they focused on low test scores in Black schools, but ignored the lack of resources and teacher support. And the news outlet framed Black teachers as ineffective rather than acknowledging structural inequalities. Now, this weaponized and codified as well, with school funding is tied to local property taxes. Now, this goes hand in hand with the codification of the busing campaign that took place. You got to remember, busing and school is tied to taxation, is it tied to the economic floor of the community. So when children are bused out of their community, their money, you might as well see a bag of money in their hand every month going with them to school, because they're transporting those resources and finances to the school that has the funding and resource. They're getting more money. They're getting more money from underfunded already schools. They're getting the money now. It's being transported to the suburban schools, where they're getting more money to have okay, since you guys, your school is ran down. We know we're not putting money in your schools. You don't have you have more renters in your communities than homeowners. So your taxation base is low. So the little taxation base that you have, we're going to go ahead and just go ahead and transport that on up north to the up north school. So that's codified that was codified in the busing programs. We have to look at this in that way. Everything that's taking place in codified law is connected with the transference of currency, and it creates the gap. It creates the economic gap. So, and then, the charter school expansion diverted funding from public schools as well, which worsening conditions in Black majority district. The charter schools did not help as well. It created the same thing as okay. And state takeovers of failing schools removed Black leadership and community control. If you go look up the General Education Board mission of 1902 with Rockefeller and Frederick T. Gates, their mission is lock, stock, and barrel. Is right on point up until today. Now let's look at the real impact with educational smear campaign. It created generations of Black Americans were denied access to formal education, setting them back economically and socially. The narrative of Black intellectual inferiority was ingrained in American society, influencing future policy. And Black teachers and administrators faced job insecurity due to school closures and state interventions. And gentrifications had led to school displacement, forcing Black students into unstable learning environment. And we're going to see how this also now affects the mind. How did not just the housing, not just the banking, education, this is rooted. The Black smear campaign is also rooted into your religious protection, your religious practices and things of that nature, where you had the African traditional religious demonized by colonization and Christianity. You have the radical Islam smear against the Nation of Islam. You have the cult smear against the Black Hebrew Israelites and the indigenous faith. You have the prosperity gospel and the misuse of Christianity in Black churches. And you have the demonic music and culture smear against Black spiritualities in hip hop and culture. Pay attention to the one regarding what's going on. Like I said, this ties into the immigration and the smear against the educational smear against the Mehmed Khalid. This is all lock, stock, and barrel. This is a smear campaign that ties everything together. That's why we wanted to bring that up as to what's going on around the world. You have to look at how all these things is interwoven and connected. Let's first, we're going to look at a couple of them. The African traditional religious demonized by colonization and Christianity were labeling indigenous Black spiritual system as pagan or evil to justify erasure. Let's look at the etymology of pagan. Pagan means first. In Black and curse, we talked about worship under your own vine and fig tree. This is a violation of Malachi 4:4. So how could you say you're a Christian society and you're violating Malachi 4:4 because your own practices, your own the indigenous practices, which are the first pagan practice that are practiced on the Americas, are now being violated? Saying, ho, wait a minute. We can't talk about these people that has deemed themselves to be the jewels. We can't talk about them, but yet there's a smear campaign that's labeling indigenous Black spiritual system as pagan or evil, and they should not be a part of the fabric of the United States of America. However, these are the same descendants of their ancestors that ran from British America to avoid religious persecution. We got to make this make sense. But look at the smear creation. European colonial powers and Christian missionaries spread the belief that African spiritual traditions were demonic, barbaric, or witchcraft. The media and political application, religious texts, and colonial propaganda claim that African spiritual practice were linked to devil worship. Google the propaganda of 1622. We saying codified in law. That was codified under the Vatican. It was the propaganda law of 1622. Look that up. They created a codification, which is in line with the papal bull, which say, oh, we have a right to send our missionaries to your colonies and root out your evil spiritual system practice. Look it up. It's the propaganda of 1622. We have to connect all these things now, people. Now look at Hollywood and Western media portray African spiritual system like voodoo, Ifa, and Kemetic spirituality as evil. They put it in horror movies depicting voodoo as dark magic, hey, woo, but yet it say, you're going to take communion? You're going to eat of the body and drink of the blood? Okay. Now, weaponization in law, which is forced Christian conversion of enslaved Africans while banning their native religious practice. Also, anti-witchcraft and anti-pagan laws criminalize African religious leaders. That still goes on today. Let's look at the radical Islam smear against the Nation of Islam. This is the tactic they use to paint the Nation of Islam as a violent extremist group to justify government surveillance. The smear creates the U.S. government and the media portrayed the Nation of Islam as a terrorist, a militant, and hate-filled anti-Semitic movement. And the media amplified it through news coverage, which focused on militant rhetoric rather than the Nation of Islam's message of self-sufficiency and Black empowerment. And figures like Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan were labeled as extremists to isolate them from mainstream Black support. All right. And the weaponization in law, where COINTELPRO targeted the Nation of Islam, spying, and attempted to dismantle the organization. It weakened and created it was a part of the assassination of Malcolm X. They also created, they harassed and discredit through the FBI psychological warfare, which led members of the Nation of Islam to be a part of the demise of Malcolm X. So this is how these fears weave their way through the fabric of the Black community. Now, the real impact of this, many Black people abandoned or hid their traditional spiritual system to avoid persecution. That's still going on today. A lot of people, they will love to resonate to what vibrates within them, but because of connections with their loved ones and this and stigma of not wanting to connect to certain Christianity practice, even in the Black community, people are ostracized from their own family members. And this stigma against African spirituality, it remains deeply ingrained even amongst our own. Like I said, even amongst our own Black communities and family, it's ostracized a lot, and which creates a religious dependency on European traditions that has replaced indigenous self-governing spiritual systems. And the Nation of Islam lost credibility in the mainstream Black circles due to media distortion. Not only the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple of America also lost credibility in mainstream Black circles due to media distortions as well. Now, I'm going to go deep into that on another segment. Now, the narrative of racial radical Islam was used to block Nation of Islam influence in politics, business, and social justice. Now, recently, I remember during the 2020, Louis Farrakhan's social sites were all banned and taken down and things of that nature. And also Malcolm X's assassination with links to the intelligence agents that have manipulated divisions within the Nation of Islam. So this is the real impact of smear campaign in religion in the Black community. Now, let's look at our final thoughts here. We have to look at our final thoughts here. You know, information is great, but information is worthless without solutions, and information is worthless without action as well. So let's look at our final thought here, where the housing smear campaigns has worked by making systematic racism seem like economic policy rather than discrimination, which means we must start looking at we must go back and look at these economic policies in housing, because they're definitely discriminatory, and we must start looking at making course correction. Banking smear campaigns disguise neutral banking policies, create financial barriers without appearing racism, but they are. We must find ways. We must find ways in this public United States jurisdictional control of America to make course correction in the banking system that will help to create an economic increase for the people that have been racially identified as Black, Negro, colored, and African American. And guess what, people? It's not reparations. Reparation is not the answer. So we're going to throw that one out the window. It's not reparation. It will be restoration that has to take first, and being able to self-determine and self-identify of who you are in your indigenous status. Education, smear campaign, disguise systematic racism as policy decisions and school empowerment rather than radical discrimination. We must bring the school system back to the community, because I don't understand how one could trust someone else to educate their child. We must look at this in detail. We must look at the educational aspect and bring that back to the community. Religious smear campaign like Black spiritual autonomy, religious protection, just as all other racial identity groups, such as the Jewels, are now being invoked their religious protection in the school. We must be able to have the Black spiritual autonomy. I'm going to say the indigenous and spiritual autonomy. The smear campaigns had deemed them dangerous, illegal, or unworthy of serious study, keeping Black communities disconnected, keeping indigenous, aboriginal, indigenous, the people that has been classified, racially classified as Black, Negro, colored, African American, has kept us disconnected from their own divine power. We must revisit it. We must revisit our religious protection and look at that more deeply in connection, because everyone, if your spiritual vibration is not Islamic, you should be able to move and vibrate accordingly to whatever vibrates within you spiritually. And that's even within our own community. Absolutely. Post-millennium, restoration of a nation. We are a nation of people. That is very important to know. All right. This has been great. We have wrapped up part 3 of Black and Curse. Until next time, I would like for you to stay woke, stay informed, and stay ready. Also, stay on the lookout for my book that will be launched on April the 22nd, 2025, called Sacred Selfishness, The Art of Loving Without Losing Yourself. And are you ready to reclaim your power in love? What if you never had to chase love again? What if you could give love without exhausting yourself? What if putting yourself first actually made your relationship stronger? This book will teach you how to love from abundance, not scarcity, how to prioritize without guilt, and how to love deeply while standing fully in your power. It's time to embrace the most radical act of love, and that's choosing yourself. Like I said, thank you for tuning in each and every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My tongue is getting twisted. Keep in mind, we're not monetizing on YouTube. Please, thank you for your support and continue to support us over on Cash App at $ Just Another Messenger. And if you know someone or you would like to be a part of the show, please send a friendly email to JustAnotherMessengerPodcast@gmail.com. Once again, I bid you farewell. I thank you for tuning in and have a wonderful evening.